Do you like the metaverse? Because I like the metaverse, and I'm really excited that Virtua's Cardano Island is sponsoring this episode. Cardano Island is one of those projects I'm excited to have in our ecosystem. There are small, medium, and large plots, also condos, plans for 4 main sections, different zones and districts, fan caves to display NFTs, 6 different land resources, land bots, non-player character slots, slots for our Cardano Summit 2021 NFTs, other games, and lots more features. I bought a large plot on Cardano Island, and I can't wait to be on my land to see what this becomes. Check out cardano.virtua.com or click the link below. In the last century, the Soviets were defeated not by a decisive hot war, but by slow decay due to a bad economic system. The West didn't ride into Red Square on tanks. It just quietly went about running its own economies effectively, while the Soviet Union destroyed itself from the inside out. I'm not saying that Cardano is at war with any other blockchains, but I am saying that Cardano has economic competitors, and competition, especially business competition, is not unlike a war in some ways. Just like the late stage Soviet Union, our competitors' greatest weapons are propaganda and misinformation, which hide and distract from their own inner decay. Meanwhile, in Cardano, every day that we just keep running this thing effectively moves us closer and closer to being on top. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to discuss more progress towards Vasil, MuesliSwap moving toward its future, Coinbase deciding that it can be Lido also, Tether reminding the world that it will comply with OFAC, and a congressman saying to Janet Yellen some of the things we would say. If you were actually alive during the Cold War, or if you only know it existed because it's sometimes a plot element in Stranger Things, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider, just think about it, just consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Welcome to another day of beautiful, steady progress. We're now at 54% of nodes reporting version 135.3, and the all-important blocks in Epic 359, we're at 40% on 135.3. And don't forget, we do keep talking about how 75% of the SPOs need to be on 135.3, but we've also got the 2 other criteria. The top exchanges need to be on upgraded to Vasil, and the top 10 dApps by total value locked need to be on Vasil. So we do have these 3 sort of criteria that trigger the Vasil Hard Fork Combinator event. The SPOs are just one of them, but we need to be at that 75%. We're making very fast, very good progress, so it looks like we'll be there soon. Like I said, we also need to worry about the exchanges. The exchanges that have the vast majority of the liquidity of ADA, they also need to be upgraded. And we need to worry about our top dApps in Cardano being upgraded. Here we can see the dApps are making progress. MuesliSwap is announcing MuesliSwap Hybrid Update. We are now in private beta mainnet. I repeat, we are now in private beta mainnet. Things are heating up as we are running final tests. This is getting exciting. We've waited a long time. We thought when Alonzo hit that we would have the launch of a whole bunch of dApps. That was not the case because Cardano wasn't quite ready. We needed some more things. We needed this Plutus 2.0 that's coming with Vasil. We're finally getting closer to the finish line. These dApps have had a long time to get ready. They've been building for a very long time. And there are going to be more things they're going to need to do once Vasil is up and running. In a lot of cases, it's not like Vasil is going to hit and suddenly, the next day, all of these dApps will necessarily be up and running. But Vasil and the pieces we've been calling Plutus 2.0 are kind of the last pieces that these dApps all substantially need to launch their real products, the ones we've been waiting for. And even when these dApps all finally do launch their sort of main event products, we can't expect that they're going to take market share from, their sort of analogs on the competitor chains overnight, because a lot of the crypto consumer world, of the very small group of people compared to the total population of the world who are actually using blockchain based apps, there's been so much propaganda and misinformation directed at Cardano that a lot of them, I think, a lot of those people, that sort of total current addressable market, let's say current addressable market, not even total addressable market, but the current market for blockchain based apps, I would guess that a lot of them are still under the misimpression that Cardano maybe doesn't even have smart contracts. Maybe they think that Cardano can't even have smart contracts. But pretty quickly, I think we're going to see these dApps just sort of gaining ground bit by bit, just like in a Cold War. Seems like during the entire Cold War, or at least during the later stages of the Cold War, the message was always that the Soviet Union was growing so fast, one day it would overtake the size of the US economy. That was the story. Even in the 1980s, there were economists in the West predicting that the size of the Soviet economy would outstrip the US economy. And as we all know, if you were alive during the Cold War, like I was, that was not the case. In fact, the entire thing collapsed because they had made some bad decisions. There were some bad economic policies put in place, some bad economic systems. The whole system didn't work, and eventually it all collapsed. This is what happens when you have a bad architecture, when you've elected to put in place policies that were stopgaps. They seemed like the only alternative, the only way to go about it because of some overarching philosophy that's not really consistent with changing times. When you put in place these stopgap policies that create bad economic systems, the system doesn't necessarily come grinding to a halt the very next day. It has to play out over time. Things decay over time until eventually it gets to the point where everything just sort of collapses. In Cardano, they've made what appear to be the right kinds of overarching architecture decisions. We don't have things like slashing. We do have things like liquid staking. So people don't have to deposit their delegation with the stake pool. We don't have to have staking derivative instruments. There are a lot of good decisions Cardano's made and a lot of bad decisions some of Cardano's biggest competitors have made. And over time, it's going to look a little bit like the Cold War. We'll see people predicting right up until the end. We'll see people predicting that Cardano will never catch up with some of its competitors. The Cardano smart contract space will never get as big as its competitors. And meanwhile, the competitors are actually decaying from the inside because of some of these bad overarching ideas, some of this bad architecture, these bad systems just result in decay day after day after day. And people don't even necessarily notice until you get to that point where things have decayed long enough that everything just sort of collapses. I believe we're seeing the seeds of that oxidation, that rust, that decay, just sort of starting to sprout right now. Those seeds were planted a long time ago. The decision to use slashing to secure the right behaviors in your staking network, in your staking system, that decision to have slashing required that staking could not be self-custodied like it is in Cardano. And that's led to a lot of, I think, probably unforeseen ramifications, like the rise of staking derivatives platforms. At first, it was just Lido, and that was already a huge problem because it sucked up this huge portion of the delegation, something like a third of the network last time I looked. And now you see that other big entities are looking around and they're like, oh, hey, great idea, Lido. We can do that too. Here, Coinbase says Coinbase will add support for Coinbase wrapped staked ETH, CBETH, on the Ethereum network, ERC20 token. Do not send this asset over other networks or your funds will be lost. What is CBETH? Let's dive in. So it was already attractive enough for people to just keep their Ether on Coinbase because they were going to be able to delegate directly from Coinbase. But now Coinbase, they're a huge entity. They're in it to win it. They're like, hey, Lido got a third of the network basically because they offered this staking derivatives instrument. We can do that too. If all of the big centralized exchanges do this, how much of the network, how much of the delegation is going to be left for anything outside of these staking derivatives platforms and these double threats now, centralized exchanges that also offer staking derivatives? It was already super, super attractive to be on Lido. It was already super attractive to be on a centralized exchange. Now you've got both of those things converging, and probably it's only a matter of time for the other centralized exchanges to catch up. This might make the centralization in the Ethereum network even worse. Over time, we're just going to see this decay, this rust in the form of centralization building and building and building. And they're going to lose one of the primary characteristics that make them a public blockchain, or at least the kind of public blockchains that we're used to seeing, the kind that we've always rooted for, the decentralized public blockchains. They're, over time, this bad decision is going to lead to more and more decay of that central characteristic of decentralization. And I don't know at this point if there's anything they can really do about it. They'll try. I mean, they'll try probably a lot of different things to reverse this trend. But I think they made one bad overarching architectural decision, and it's just going to build and build and build over time, just like we saw this gradual decay in the Soviet Union during the Cold War until it reached collapse. I think Cardano, because they didn't make these really bad overarching decisions, Cardano's sort of in the other position right now. Cardano just needs to run its network efficiently, just like it's doing right now, and its competitor, one of its biggest competitors, is going to be suffering this ongoing decay. This decay in the form of centralization also plays a big role in the censorship problems that Ethereum is facing right now. And we saw this today. Tether was basically congratulated for dropping this little blog entry with this title: Tether holds firm on decision not to freeze Tornado Cash addresses. Everybody was super happy about that. You're holding firm on your decision to not freeze Tornado Cash addresses. But then there's this second clause. Tether also awaits law enforcement instruction. And what they mean by that is not exactly what I think some people had in mind when they were congratulating Tether today. So Tether says, Tether works closely with law enforcement worldwide to assist in investigations, including freezing addresses. When Tether receives an applicable legitimate request from a verified law enforcement agent to freeze a privately held wallet, the company complies with the freeze. So far, OFAC has not indicated that a stablecoin issuer is expected to freeze secondary market addresses that are published on OFAC's SDN list or that are operated by persons and entities that have been sanctioned by OFAC. They're basically just explaining that they will totally comply with any request to freeze anybody's wallet. They just haven't been told by any law enforcement agency to do so in the case of Tornado Cash. This article isn't about Tether defiantly standing up against the US federal government, as some would have had you believe today. This is a CYA memo. This is them trying to establish that they are totally happy to comply with the OFAC sanction list. They're just waiting for, pretty much sounds like, any law enforcement agency, any what they call verified law enforcement agency, to tell them to go ahead and freeze some wallets. They're letting you know in pretty direct terms, they're definitely going to do it. They're definitely going to censor those wallets. They just need somebody to go ahead and tell them to do it. Of course, at the heart of this censorship issue is the original action of the Department of the Treasury in putting Tornado Cash on the sanctions list. It turns out it's not just us in crypto who were a little bit taken aback by the actions of the US government in putting a piece of open source code on the sanctions list. Here we have a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Representative Tom Emmer, sending this letter to Janet Yellen. He says, I sent a letter to Treasury Secretary Yellen regarding the unprecedented sanctioning of Tornado Cash. The growing adoption of decentralized technology will certainly raise new challenges for OFAC. Nonetheless, technology is neutral and the expectation of privacy is normal. Getting into the actual letter, he makes a pretty interesting argument. He doesn't just say, hey, why are you sanctioning code? It's pretty clever the way he addresses this. So first off, he does say, these are the first sanctions issued against something other than an individual or entity determined to be responsible for or complicit in malicious cyber-enabled activities that pose a threat to U.S. national security. He doesn't just say that, though, because I think he knows, someone on his staff realizes that there is this human element behind even a platform like Tornado Cash. There are humans who can be arrested. There might be people, voting in a DAO, determining the direction of a platform like Tornado Cash. So he doesn't just make that argument, because I think we can all imagine the Department of the Treasury coming back and saying, hey, there were developers who kicked this thing off, and they either knew or should have known it'd be used for these kinds of, illicit activities. So he doesn't just make that argument. He also makes this other argument. He says, hey, there are a bunch of addresses. There are a bunch of addresses that you say are related to Tornado Cash, and they're included in your sanctions. He says, OFAC's SDN list appears to be a divergence from previous OFAC precedent because several of the Tornado Cash Ethereum addresses specifically listed below are not, to our knowledge, an individual or entity. Rather, they are smart contract addresses whose operation is determined exclusively by open source software found on the Ethereum blockchain. In other words, the addresses do not appear to be a person, entity, or property, all properly the target of sanctions. They are instead widely distributed technological tools, and they are not under the control of any entity or natural person. He's really getting to the crux of the matter here. Hey, you sanctioned a bunch of Ethereum addresses, and some of those addresses are smart contract addresses. There's not necessarily a human behind that address. And we know from the language he quotes up here that it needs to be some kind of a person or corporation, partnership, association, trust, joint venture, group, subgroup, or other organization. None of those things sort of listed in the definition of an entity includes smart contracts. At the end of his letter, he asks a bunch of common sense questions, like, are any of the Ethereum addresses specified in your sanctions list believed to be owned and controlled by a person who accepts and transmits value for customers? If so, which ones? If the addresses are considered aliases of a person, please describe for each address how paying or otherwise interacting with that address is equivalent to paying or interacting with that person. And keep in mind that he's talking about a lot of addresses that are Ethereum smart contract addresses. He also asks, given that the Tornado Cash backend will operate unchanged as an anonymizing technology as long as the Ethereum network continues to operate, who or what entity did OFAC believe was reasonably responsible for imposing controls on the Tornado Cash blockchain contracts? He says, can innocent U.S. persons who now have funds trapped in the Tornado Cash smart contract reclaim their funds? If so, how? Are otherwise innocent U.S. persons who receive unsolicited funds from SDN listed addresses in breach of law or regulation? What actionable steps should people in this situation take to comply with sanctions obligations while recognizing that on blockchain, individuals can receive funds unknowingly and unwillingly? To the extent valuable property is held at the sanctioned addresses, and to the extent a law-abiding person is the only person able to remove said valuable property from that address through the creation of an Ethereum transaction that they alone form and undertake, is that property accurately described as belonging to that law-abiding person, or does it, through some mechanism or legal fiction, belong to a person listed on the sanctions list? Finally, it is customary to afford due process to individuals and entities to appeal a sanction to OFAC when they can demonstrate certain things. How does OFAC intend to uphold the appeals process for the sanction addresses that have no ability to appeal the sanction to OFAC, because the above mentioned addresses are smart contracts with no agency, corporate or personal, and as such cannot speak for themselves or those whose funds they hold? These are all pretty clever legalistic type arguments, like, hey, you guys normally have a due process, you guys normally afford due process to, people you put on your OFAC list, but because these smart contracts aren't a person who can, appeal this decision that you've made to sanction them, how do you intend to uphold this due process? These are great questions by Representative Emmer. I'm super curious to see if he gets any kind of a substantial reply from the Department of Treasury, because I think almost any answer they come up with to some of these questions is going to sound ridiculous, just like the sanctions themselves. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.